Hey guys, it's Vic, and today I plan on going over all of the books that I'm going to read for this fall. Now, just a disclaimer, when it comes to fall, I am almost exclusively a fantasy girl. I just adore reading fantasy in the fall. I don't really know why, because I know they're not directly connected, but I think just the cozy vibes of fall just match this vibe of fantasy for me. So most of the books on this list are going to be fantasy reads, although I will have a few thriller/horror books at the end. Now, just jumping right in, the first book on my TBR for this fall is Divine Rivals by Rebecca Ross. Now, I don't know about you, but this book has been all over my TikTok feed and my YouTube feed. Everyone is talking about this book. They say it's the next ACOTAR, the next Fourth Wing, and I honestly kind of hope so, because if I could get a book that's as good as those two, I would be set. This book is in the fantasy genre, and it's also available on Kindle Unlimited, so if you have a KU subscription like me, then you can read it there. And it is the first book in a series, so it's not a standalone book. So in this book, we are following this world where the gods have been asleep for many centuries, and they just recently woke up, and immediately they've started fighting again, and they've started warring again. But instead of keeping the war amongst themselves, they are bringing humans into it and making humans fight for them in wars amongst them as well, including our main character Iris's brother. Unfortunately for Iris, not long after her brother leaves for the war, he goes missing on the front lines, and Iris is left to just figure things out at home and try to keep their family from falling apart. Not only is her brother missing, but her mom is struggling with an addiction at home, and Iris is trying to keep everything together, and she thinks the best way to keep things moving is if she can get this promotion to columnist at the Oath Gazette where she works. In the midst of all of this worry, she's trying to cope, so she decides to start writing letters to her missing brother. She doesn't send them anywhere, but she keeps them underneath the door of her wardrobe in her room. But the letters start to disappear, and before she knows it, someone starts writing letters back to her anonymously. They start to forge a bond as they're writing letters back and forth, and unbeknownst to Iris, the person on the other side of the letters is her dark and cold rival, Roman Kit. The two forge a bond through their letter writing that will follow them all the way to the front lines of the war. I'm so excited for this book, not just because everyone's raving about it and it has amazing reviews, but I adore this enemies to lovers or rivals to lovers trope. I love to see it. I like slow burn. I like this conflict of you wish you didn't love them even though you do, and that's what I'm expecting for this book. So I am super excited to dive in. I also feel like the premise is kind of unique because it sounds like it's a fantasy book that's set in more of a realistic current reality setting since she's working for a newspaper, but I'm so ready to just dive in. It's actually the next book on my list to read. Once I finish the current book that I'm reading, that one is next up immediately. Now, the next book on my list is another book that I'm going to be reading on my Kindle since I don't have a physical copy, and it is The Stars Are Dying by Chloe Penaranda. Now, this is a very random choice for me. I just happened to get a TikTok about it, and it just sounded like something I would like, and again, everyone was hyping it up. But when I went and looked at it on Goodreads, I was actually kind of surprised because it had a lot of 5-star ratings, but then it also had a lot of 1-star ratings, and that's like a huge gap, like for a rating system. Like, I understand the 4-star, 3 stars, but for it to be almost entirely 1 stars and 5 stars, something's going on, because people are either absolutely hating this book or absolutely loving it, and I'm really curious to see where I fall on the spectrum. This is another fantasy book that is loosely inspired by the Greek myth of Astrea. In this world, we're following our main character, whose name is Astrea, and she lives in this world where vampires are roaming freely and slaughtering humans, and she's kept safe where she currently is, but the person keeping her safe is not the nicest. And on top of that, Astrea is missing most of the memories of her life. She can really only remember about 5 years of her life, so she doesn't really know who she is or what her past is. Astrea decides to risk the danger and escape the person keeping her safe to learn more about herself and learn more about her past. And on her way, she meets this mysterious man named Knight, who she can't tell if he loves her and wants her, or if he hates her and is just using her. And he's very morally gray, and everyone's obsessed with him, and I'm very excited to meet him. And together they end up in this crisis where they attend the Libertatum, which is this game of trials that the 5 human kingdoms have to compete in, and whoever wins will essentially get immunity from the vampires. The vampires won't be allowed to go to their area and slaughter the humans there. While Astrea and Knight are there, one of the human contestants is murdered, and Astrea has to make the decision whether to step in and become a contestant herself to defend the human realm and possibly lose her life in the process, or to sit back and keep herself safe while putting her realm at risk. Now, me personally, I love when it's a fantasy book and they have these trials or this game or this competition that they have to go through, like Throne of Glass or Fourth Wing. I adore that. I don't know why, but if that's in a book, I'm pretty like 90% sure I'm going to like it. And so I'm very excited to read this book. Even with the differences between 1-star and 5-star ratings, I feel like I would still enjoy the book. I don't know what could go wrong. So I feel like it just has to be the implementation that would keep people between a 1-star and a 5-star rating, but I'm willing to give it a chance, and it has all of those good fantasy vibes. And ever since reading The Vampires of El Norte and The Serpents and Wings of Night, I've been kind of obsessed with vampires, so I'm really excited to see where this book takes me. This next book on my list I was a little bit scared of. It was stalking me every time I went to Target. I would see it on the shelves, but it was so large that I was scared to buy it, and that's Ordinary Monsters by J.M. Miro. Look at this. Look at this. It is over 600 pages. So every time I saw it for like the past year, I was interested, but it's such a large book. It's a little intimidating. I mean, I've read large books before. I've read books that are like 800, 900 pages, but usually they're like the finale in a series, and so I've already dedicated so much time and I already know that I like the characters and the author's writing style. But for the first and only book, because this is a standalone, I believe, to be over 600 pages, it's intimidating. It really is, because this is going to take a lot of time for me to dedicate. So I'm interested to see, but I finally got it, so I'm ready to read it. This is a historical fantasy book that follows two children, the first one being 16-year-old Charlie Ovid, who has these magical powers where his body heals itself. And we're also following young Marlowe, whose body glows blue and who can melt or mend flesh at will. And these two kids are in London, and they're being escorted out of London to Edinburgh by these two detectives because they are being hunted by this dark figure, this man that's made of smoke. And they're trying to get to Edinburgh because there is a house there that houses other children that are like them that have these powers, and those kids are called the Talents. Now, I don't know much else about the story except that they're trying to escape this dark man and they all have these powers, but this book is supposed to explore them figuring out their differences, figuring out where they belong in life, and also understanding what their powers are and why they have them. So I am so excited for this, even though it's not really dark academia because it's not a school, but it's giving those same vibes, if that makes sense, that dark and mysterious London vibe, and they're trying to escape this monster. I'm excited to see where it goes, especially with 600 pages of story. Something's bound to happen, so I am very interested to see. I've actually not heard anyone talking about this book, so I really hope it's good. I really hope it's good. All right, so this next book is also a book I got at Target, and the cover and art just appealed to me, and that is Masters of Death by Olivia Blake. I absolutely adore Olivia Blake. She wrote The Atlas Six, if you're familiar. That's one of my favorite dark academia books. I think I read it last year or the year before last, and I was surprised to see that she actually has quite a few other books that I had never heard of, including this one. But this one really just caught my eye. Like, the artwork is so pretty, but what really got me is this. Are you kidding me? Look at that. That is gorgeous. I don't know who they are, but they're gorgeous. And if you go to the back, there's more. Like, who are these? I don't know who they are, but they're beautiful, and it made me want to read the book just so I can know who they are. I'm a sucker for a pretty book, and this is a pretty book. So I'm really excited. And although that Atlas 6 was very dark academia, more serious vibes, this one is definitely giving a lighter vibe, not so serious. In this book, we are following a struggling real estate agent named Viola, who also happens to be a vampire. And she's struggling because she's trying to sell this house, but it's haunted. There's a ghost that refuses to leave. He was murdered, and he doesn't want to move on until he can figure out how he died. So in an attempt to help this ghost and get him out of the house, Viola reaches out to this medium named Fox Demora. Unfortunately for Viola, Fox is a fraud medium, but unfortunately for her, he actually is the godson of Death himself. And together they work to rid the house of the ghost and unexpectedly get thrown into this quest that neither of them really want. And along the way, they end up getting help from an unruly poltergeist, a demonic personal trainer, an angel, and a lovesick reaper. And this just sounds like such an interesting book. I really can't figure out what it's going to be like. In my head, I'm picturing it as like a sitcom, almost like very comical, very light, very funny, especially with all of these different types of fantasy characters that are set in a real world setting. So I am super excited for this book. I really hope that it's funny. It seems like it has the potential to be funny, and I'm excited to figure out who all these pretty people are. This is also an LGBTQ plus story. I don't think all of the romances are, but at least some of them are, and I'm just so excited to read this. I feel like it's gonna be like this cozy sitcom, fantasy sitcom. I don't know. That might be the wrong vibe, but that's what I'm taking from it, and I am so excited to read it. All right, this next one is actually kind of an odd read for me. It's What You Gonna Do by Avery Flynn, and I say that this is an odd read for me because this is a romantic comedy fantasy, or I guess like a romantic comedy that takes place in a fantasy world, and I just don't read a ton of romantic comedies. I tend to read books that have romance subplots, so it's like the romance just happens to be there, but this one is a more dedicated romance book. So this book is a dual point of view, and in this world, magic is very normal and common and accepted. It's just a part of daily life, and we follow two main characters. Our first main character, Tilda, is actually the only person in her extremely powerful magical family that doesn't have any magical powers, and she also has a tendency to cause things to go wrong, whether that's she's just clumsy. Even with magic, things just tend to go wrong around her, and she unfortunately messes up one of her sister's spells and causes it to backfire and put a curse on her entire family. And unfortunately, the only person that is willing to help her is also the person that she dislikes the most, which is Gil Connolly, which is someone who does have magic and who Tilda considers just as handsome as he is cocky and annoying. So we're following the pair as they're trying to break this curse on Tilda's family, and they also happen to run into some people with plans for world domination, and they start to fall in love against their own will. And I think it's just going to be a cute, quirky little read. I'm interested to see the fantasy elements because it presents itself as very lighthearted and very just cute, but then the little world domination piece is just thrown in there. So I'm excited to see where this goes. I think it'll be a fun read, maybe like a cleanser, a palate cleanser after something that's more heavy that I read, but I'm super excited for it. Now, the next book is one I don't have a physical copy for. I'm probably just gonna end up getting the ebook version because I haven't seen it anywhere in a physical bookstore, but I've started to hear people talking about it on Book Talk. Now, this book is actually interesting because the person that mentioned this book is known for being the person that predicted Fourth Wing, or being like the first person to give a review that Fourth Wing was really good. And so everyone has been trusting her opinion on books, and she says that the next book that's going to blow up like Fourth Wing and like A Court of Thorns and Roses is The Jasad Heir. So of course the next book that I'm going to read is The Jasad Heir by Sarah Hashem. Now, this is an Egyptian inspired fantasy book. So in this book we are following the heir of Jasad, Sylvia, whose entire family was murdered when she was 10 years old. Now she's 20 years old and she's trying to start a new life under the Nizal rule, which is the kingdom or the people that killed her family. Under Nizal rule, they are laying waste to Jasad and they've banned magic across all 4 kingdoms, so Sylvia is having to hide her magical powers. Unfortunately for Sylvia, the Nizal heir has tracked a group of people from Jasad to the village that Sylvia is living in, and through a series of unfortunate circumstances, he uncovers that Sylvia has magical powers. But he does offer her a way out. If Sylvia will compete as Nizal's champion in the Alcala tournament and wins, then she won't be persecuted for having magical powers. Unfortunately, along the way, Sylvia realizes that by winning the tournament, she would be giving up any chances of reuniting Jasad under her banner, and she's forced to choose between choosing the life that she's built for herself and earned and choosing the life that she left behind. It honestly sounds like such a good premise, so I am really excited to read this book, and it does have good reviews so far, even though I've not heard a ton of people talking about it yet. So I'm excited to see if I can get an early start on this possibly going to blow up book. And I do believe that it's going to be a part of a series. I can't remember if I read that specifically, but I think it will be. It sounds like it will be. The next book up is Once Upon a Broken Heart by Stephanie Garber. I see this book everywhere. Everyone says this is like within the golden trio of fantasy books, and if you've read A Court of Thorns and Roses and Fourth Wing but you haven't read this book, then you're missing out. And so even though the plot didn't sound that interesting to me, which I don't know why it didn't, it just didn't originally, I'm going to read it. Everyone's telling me it's good, so I'm going to read it. I'm hoping everything will just work out and I'll enjoy this book. This is a YA fantasy romance story, and I think it's either a series or a duology. I know there's a second book for sure. So in the story, we're following Evangeline Fox, who has always believed in true love and happy endings up until the love of her life is getting married to someone else. And in her desperation at losing the love of her life, she makes a deal with the Prince of Hearts, who is this wicked immortal, and in exchange for getting his help, he just wants her to give him 3 kisses at his time and place of choosing. But after giving him the first kiss, Evangeline realizes that the Prince of Hearts has more in store for her than she realized, and it was a dangerous decision for her to make a bargain with an immortal. She realizes that his plans will either end in a happy ending or the most devastating tragedy. The plot actually sounds like decent, but I don't know why. I've just never been called to that. I think I tend to have like a cold shoulder towards YA because I've read some YA fantasies before and they just were very predictable, so I'm always a little bit unsure of YA fantasies, but I'm willing to give it a try. I have several on this list actually, and I'm willing to give them a try again. All right, with this next book, yes, I know I'm late. I've owned this book forever, it feels like, and I just haven't gotten around to reading it, and I decided that this year I'm going to read it. And that's Six of Crows by Leigh Bardugo. And I know everyone has read this. There's like, I think they're making a Netflix adaptation of this or something related to this. I just never got around to reading it. I bought it like forever ago when I first got back into reading, and I just never read it. I know I should have. I feel like everybody has read this, and there's like a whole universe that this story exists in. Like, this story is not the only series that exists in this universe, so there's a lot of catching up for me to do. I'm aware of it. All I really know about this book is that it involves a heist, and the Shadow and Bone series is either related or it just takes place in the same universe. And I don't know if I should read the Shadow and Bone series before this. If I should, let me know, because I was going to read this first and nobody said not to. So that was my plan, but if not, just let me know and I can read those first. But yeah, all I know is it's really a heist. It just says a convict with a thirst for revenge, a sharpshooter who can't walk away from a wager, a runaway with a privileged past, a spy known as the Wraith, a heartrender using her magic to survive the slums, a thief with a gift for unlikely escapes. Kaz's crew are the only ones who might stand between the world and destruction if they don't kill each other first. So yeah, I'm gonna give it a try. Very little details are given about this other than it's a heist, and there's a lot of different people that maybe don't like each other that are in the crew for the heist, but I'm willing to give it a try, especially since everyone seems to love it so much. And I'm just gonna dive into this universe and we'll see. I'll probably end up reading Shadow of Bone too if I also like this, so we'll see. Next up is another book that everyone talks about that I am probably late to the game in reading, and that is Caraval by Stephanie Garber. I don't know, everyone talks about these books and I'm just not getting to them. I think it's just when books are really hyped up, I tend to avoid them because I'm scared of getting disappointed in all the hype. That's what I did with Fourth Wing, that's what I did with ACOTAR. I'm trying not to be that person anymore and just make myself read it and get to enjoy it, and not just hiding from books that are supposed to be good. And this is actually the same author as Once Upon a Broken Heart, which is funny because the premise of this book was super interesting to me when the other book didn't sound that interesting. So this one does sound interesting to me. We're following Scarlett and her sister Tella. They live on this tiny isolated island with their really cruel father, and Scarlett has always dreamed of leaving to go to this once-a-year performance called Caraval, where the audience gets to be a part of the performance. Scarlett starts to think she's not going to ever get to see it because her father announces that he has planned an arranged marriage for her, but she actually receives an invitation, and her sister leave the island to go to Caraval Caraval for 5 days. But as soon as they arrive, Scarlet's sister Tella is kidnapped by the creator of Caraval, and Scarlet realizes that this year's show is all about Tella, and the first person to find Tella wins the game. As Scarlet is looking for her sister, she knows that she's told that everything about Caraval is a performance and it's not real, but she can't help but get swept up in the emotions and the love and the heartbreak and the magic of Caraval and all of its competitors and participants. But regardless of Caraval's reality, Scarlet must find her sister before the 5 nights of Caraval are over, where she risks losing her sister forever. I'm super excited. Like I said earlier, I love books that have like this game trope or this trial trope, and literally this whole thing is a game, so I'm excited to see how it goes. I also like the idea of not being able to trust everything that the character is perceiving because you don't know what's fake and what's real. So I am super excited to read this. I believe there's a second book as well. I've actually heard people say the second book is better than the first book, so I'm interested to see how that shows up for me, but this one has been on my TBR for a long time, so I'm excited to actually set aside the time and read it. Alright, this next one is another, as you can see, Target find, and that is Serpent and Dove by Shelby Mahiran? I'm so sorry, I don't know how to pronounce any last name, but this one had such little information given to me about what it was about, and I just fell in love still. Like literally the back of it just says, bound as one to love, honor, or burn, a witch and a witch hunter thrust into holy matrimony. There was only one way such a story could end, a stake and a match. I'm sorry, that sounds so interesting, like a forced marriage, enemies to lovers, he's a witch hunter, she's a witch. I'm so interested in this book. I've also had this one forever. It's just been sitting on my bookshelf. I need to get around to these books. I swear they're just sitting there. But I'm super excited for this. I am usually not a huge fan of forced marriage tropes, but because this one is also like an enemies to lover secrets, like is he gonna love her, is he gonna kill her vibe, I'm super excited for it. And I've also heard really good reviews on this book. I think it's a duology. I know there's a second book, so I feel like I'm getting myself into a lot of series for this fall, but I can't help it. I love it. I just love fantasy series so much. So this one is super interesting, and I adore the cover too. It looks so beautiful. Now I know I literally just got done talking about how I've had these books forever, but this next book is actually a book that I've had physically the longest without reading, and that is Furyborn by Claire Legrand. I don't know why I haven't read this book. I think I've had it for like 2 years plus, something like that, and it's just been sitting there and I haven't read it. And someone mentioned it on their YouTube channel like the other day, and it reminded me that I actually own this book, and I like remembered the premise, and I decided that I'm going to read this. If it kills me, I'm going to read this book. And of course, this is a YA fantasy, and it is book 1 of a trilogy, so there are 2 other books. And this is a dual point of view, dual timeline, which I used to not like, but recently I have encountered some books that did the dual timeline really well, and now I am very intrigued, and I tend to like those books. But the first point of view slash timeline, we are following Riel, whose best friend has just been kidnapped by these assassins, and she's willing to do whatever it takes to get him back. But in the process of getting him back, she exposes that she is one of 2 prophesied queens, either the Sun Queen, the Queen of Light, or the Queen of Blood. And she has to prove that she is the Sun Queen through these series of elemental trials. And if she can't prove that she's the Sun Queen, she will be executed as the Blood Queen. But that's only if she can survive the trials themselves. In the second point of view slash timeline, we are 1,000 years into the future, and we are following Eliana, who is a bounty hunter for the Undying Empire. She believes that she's untouchable up until her mother suddenly vanishes, and in an attempt to find her, she partners up with this rebel captain, and together they end up uncovering how evil the empire that she works for actually is. Riel and Eliana fight in this cosmic war spanning millennia, and their connections to each other are exposed, and their stories interact and show shocking connections between them that determine their fates and the fates of their respective worlds and times. I'm just excited to see how 2 women that are 1,000 years apart are interacting with each other and determining each other's fate. I'm very interested to see how that turns out. We're gonna have to see. I'm wondering if they're actually going to be physically interacting with each other, if it's like a time travel thing, or if it's something else. I'm very excited. I know it's weird to say that I'm excited for this book that I've been holding on to for 2 years without ever touching, but I actually am excited to read this, and I feel like it's going to fit the vibe of this fall really well. It's like a true fantasy book. So alright, the next book is a repeat author. It is Ninth House by Leigh Bardugo, and this is actually kind of a funny story because I had never heard of this book until the sequel to this book popped up on Book of the Month, and I like went to the sequel and was like, oh, I like the cover, and realized it was the second book in a series I'd never read. And so I picked this one up and was like, okay, I'm going to read it. But this is actually very nice fall vibes. It's very dark academia, at least that's what it's giving me from the synopsis, and it just has a really interesting plot that seems very different from Six of Crows, which is the author's other series. I don't think these stories are related. I think this is like a separate series that's not in that universe, but this one sounds very interesting to me. So in this book, we are following Galaxy Stern, also called Alex, who is part of Yale's freshman class very unexpectedly. Alex was raised in LA by a very hippie mom. She dropped out of high school early and was kind of spending her time around drug dealer boyfriends and dead-end jobs and just not the greatest crowd. And at the age of 20, she ends up being the only survivor of this unsolved multiple homicide murder thing. She's the only survivor, and while she's at her hospital bed, these people approach her and give her a second chance at life, offering her a full ride scholarship to Yale. But in return, she has to infiltrate these secret societies that exist within Yale. As she starts to look deeper into these secret societies, she realizes that they are participating in these occult activities that are more sinister than she could have imagined, including playing with forbidden magic, raising the dead, and sometimes preying on the living. I'm excited. I like secret societies. I like an underdog. I am very excited to see where this goes. I can't tell if magic is a normal part of this world or if it's not normal, and so it's weird that they're like messing with it, because it said forbidden magic, so I'm like, is magic normal and this is just a magic they're not supposed to use? I'm interested to see how it turns out, but it just sounds so good, and I feel like it's going to have really nice dark academia vibes. Now this next book is highly anticipated. It is Legend Born by Tracy Dion, and this book has been everywhere and I've been wanting to read it. Again, I've been holding on to it. I know I say that about literally every book, but I'm going to dedicate time for this one. It's giving secret society, maybe not quite dark academia. I might be proved wrong with that, but it's the same secret society vibe, and I am so excited for that. This is also a YA fantasy, and we are following our main character, 16-year-old Bree Matthews, whose mother has died, and since she's wanted pretty much nothing to do with her family or anything that reminds her of her family, so she's going to this like residential program for really bright students to complete high school. She thinks it's this perfect escape to get away from any thoughts of her family, but on her first night there, she witnesses this magical attack, this demon that's flying and feeding on human energies, and uncovers the secret society within the school called Legend Borns that hunt down these demons. After viewing this attack, this boy approaches her who calls himself a Merlin, and he attempts to erase her memories. But in the process of attempting to erase her memories, he not only fails to erase her memories, but he unlocks these memories that she had either pushed down or she had forgotten, that make her remember that there was this element of magic involved in her mother's death. There was a Merlin present at her mother's hospital bed when she passed away, and she becomes determined to find out more information about the secret society and what they do and how they were involved in her mother's death. In the process, she ends up teaming up with a self-exiled former Legend Born as they work to uncover the secrets of the society, and she's confronted and realizes that they are all claiming to be the descendants of King Arthur's knights, and that they are about to fight this secret magical war, and she will have to choose sides on whether to fight with them in this war or to fight against them. I feel like this is a really unique premise to have this magical King Arthur. I feel like there was an era of time where King Arthur lookalikes or similar like fantasy series was kind of big, but I haven't seen anything in a while, so I'm interested to see how this plays out, what her role is in it, and just to have those secret society vibes. I love secret societies, so even though I already know what the secret of the secret society is, at least the King Arthur part, I'm excited to see what else is part of this book, and I've been looking forward to it for such a long time. Alright, my last fantasy book that is on this list is Dance of Thieves by Mary E. Pearson. This is another book that I don't actually know all that much about, except that it's fantasy and people say it's really good. The back of the book didn't really give me too much, but I didn't want to look too hard and accidentally spoil myself, so I'll just read the back. A formidable outlaw family that claims to be the first among nations. A son destined to lead, thrust suddenly into power. 3 fierce young women of the Rattan, the Queen's premier guard. A legendary street thief leading a mission determined to prove herself. A dark secret that is a threat to the entire continent. When outlaw leader meets reformed thief, a cat-and-mouse game of false moves ensues, bringing them intimately together in a battle that may cost them their lives and their hearts. I can't tell you exactly what it's about, but it sounds interesting. A lot of different characters, a lot of different movements, and possibly a little enemies to lovers moment. I don't know, but it sounds interesting and it has been highly recommended to me. So I'm very excited to read this. I know there's a second book. I'm not sure if it's a duology or if it's more than that and the others just haven't come out yet, but there is for sure a second book. So I'm really excited. It's been hyped up to me, and I kind of like going into books not knowing anything because everything is just a surprise. So I'm very ready for this one. All right, so these last few are like horror thriller. There's not a ton of them, but these are ones that I've had for a while and I really want to read. I tend to read a little bit of horror. I'm more of a thriller person, but horror books just tend to be hard for me because a lot of times they don't scare me and they're slower paced, but I do have some that I want to read, starting with Nod by Adrienne Barnes. This one is interesting because there is a podcast that I listen to that is very similar premise, and I'm curious to see if this handles it differently than the podcast. So Nod, I'm just gonna read the back. Dawn breaks over Vancouver and no one in the world has slept the night before, or almost no one. A few people, perhaps 1 in 10,000, can still sleep, and they've all shared the same golden dream. After 6 days of absolute sleep deprivation, psychosis will set in. After 4 weeks, the body will die. In the interim, panic ensues and a bizarre new world arises in which those previously on the fringes of society take the lead. Paul, a writer, continues to sleep while his partner Tanya disintegrates before his eyes and the new world swallows the old one whole. So like no one can sleep except a few people. Like it's like apocalypse and no one can sleep. The podcast that I've listened to, I think it's called The Edge of Sleep with like Markiplier voicing it. Very similar premise, except it's like if you sleep you die, I think. So I'm interested to see like how do people hold up with the sleep deprivation? How is the world working? I'm excited. No one's ever mentioned this book before. It's just like a tiny little book, so I'm excited to see if it's good or not. The next book is another random Target read. I guess this one could be thriller or horror, and it is The Finalist by David Bell. This one is very interesting because it's kind of competition survival centered. So in this book we have 6 college students. None of them can afford their tuition, so they are entering this competition to win this prestigious scholarship for a full ride at their college. In order to be eligible for this scholarship, they have to enter this house and stay in this house for 8 hours. The door locks behind them, and if they leave before the 8 hours are up, they forfeit their participation, their qualification in this contest for the scholarship. It seems easy enough, but after they're locked in, this violent protest starts outside, and before they know it, one of the finalists is murdered. The students realize that they don't have anywhere to go, the door is locked, and if they leave, they lose the chance for their tuition to be paid for, and so they decide to stay, but they slowly start to turn on one another as they try to figure out who the killer is and stay alive. This book is supposed to be a very good representation of what people will do when you're in a very scarce resource academic setting, and I am very interested to see how it goes. I feel like it's going to be one of those everybody seems like the killer and then who the killer actually is like unexpected. So I'm very interested to see, you know, what links will people go to get their tuition paid for and to attend college, and you never know. So I'm interested to see how this book turns out. This next book is the second to last book, and you've probably not heard of it before. I'd be really surprised if you had. It is Mine to Kill by David St. Clair. Now, I got this book at a used bookstore and it was actually kind of expensive. I think it's because it's like a collector's edition or they don't make this anymore, something like that. But allegedly everything in this horror book is true and actually happened. So, on Wednesday, August 28th, 1878, Esther Cox, a plain, unassuming girl from the town of Amherst in Nova Scotia, rode out in a buggy on her first date. Storm clouds lowered on the horizon. Later there was lightning and torrential rain. Esther returned at nightfall, soaked through and too distraught to speak to her family. Her innocent trip had turned into the beginning of a personal nightmare. At first there were rustlings in her bedroom at night, then unseen hands gouged a terrible message on her wall. Esther Cox, you were mine to kill. On the third night, Esther leapt from her bed. Oh my God, she screamed, I'm dying. Please, dear God, I'm dying. This is the chilling story of a girl's possession by malevolent spirits. Everything in this book actually happened. That's what got me interested. Everything happened? Hell yes, I'm up for it. I want to know. So this is a horror book. I'm very interested to see. It has been thoroughly read, thoroughly used, but nothing better like a horror book that's actually true, or allegedly true, I guess I should say. So I'm excited to see how this goes. I do think it's an older book, so it might read a little bit differently than I'm used to, but I still think the story will be very interesting. And last but not least, I have the Mary Shelley Club by Goldie Moldavsky. I'm sorry if I butchered your last name. This book Aaron actually got for me while he was out with some friends at Barnes & Noble. This was I think it's like a $5 pick. If you buy like a cafe item at Barnes & Noble, they have books that are only $5, and this was the pick. So this book follows Rachel Chavez as she starts at a new prep school as a scholarship student. She pretty much doesn't have any friends, and she's a little bit seen as like this weird outcast, and to kind of comfort herself and make herself feel better, she watches horror movies and scary movies. Somehow Rachel gets caught up in this prank gone wrong, and she goes from being this weird loner outcast to public enemy #1 at her school, and she's pretty much hated by everyone except this club, the Mary Shelley Club, that approaches her. They are this mysterious society of students that orchestrate these elaborate pranks called fear tests, which are these pranks that are inspired by urban legends and horror movie tropes. At first, Rachel is enjoying the power that comes with being part of this club and getting to help orchestrate these elaborate pranks, but slowly the fear tests start to escalate and escalate until it gets deadly, and before she knows it, someone is targeting the Mary Shelley Club in the series of murders, which leaves Rachel to track down the killer. I'm hoping to see some interesting horror movie tropes, since it seems like that's specifically mentioned. I'm excited to see what it's like. It seems like it might be a little bit campy. It says high school is a scream at the top, but I'm super excited for this one. I like the idea of a prank gone wrong or people going too far, and it's been a while since I've read a book in a high school setting, especially a horror book, so very interested in this. That was the last book on my fall TBR. I am hoping I will be able to get to all of these books on the list before fall is over. It's going to really put me in the mood. I'm going to be reading heavy fantasy over the next couple of months, and I am so excited for it. So if you liked this video, please leave me a like down below, and if you want to see more bookish content or just more of me in general, feel free to subscribe to this channel, and feel free to let me know what you plan on reading on the comments down below, or if you've read any of the books that I've mentioned, please let me know your thoughts on them, especially the more obscure ones that I was not sure of. I would love to hear your thoughts. But thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!